She woke up in the dark, salt and rust in the air, her wrists bound, water dripping nearby. Above her, footsteps, then a voice, the same voice that whispered, "I love you," hours before. But now he was bargaining, selling her like cargo. Margaret Hayes was 57, a retired nurse, a widow who believed in second chances. Tonight she was fighting for her life where no one could hear her scream. Margaret had spent 30 years caring for strangers. After her husband died, she promised herself she'd try to smile again. But the house in Georgia felt too empty, so she did what millions do when loneliness becomes unbearable. She opened a dating app. That's when David found her. He sent flowers, called her beautiful, booked a romantic cruise for two. But the man behind those messages was never who he claimed to be, and by the time Margaret realized the truth, she was already trapped, locked beneath a luxury liner, in international waters, where laws bend and mercy dies. Before we go further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Margaret lived on a quiet street outside Atlanta. She'd worked as a hospice nurse for 32 years. When her husband Michael died suddenly, the grief was physical. It sat in her chest like stone. 6 months later, her sister suggested online dating. Not to replace him, just to remember what laughing felt like. Margaret resisted, but one lonely night she downloaded the app. Within hours, David Kent messaged her, "You have a kind smile. The kind that makes people feel safe." It made her cry because it was true. They talked every night. He said he was a retired contractor from Tampa, also widowed. He loved the ocean and old movies, and he listened, really listened. After 2 months, he suggested they meet, not for coffee, something special, a 7-day Caribbean cruise. He'd handle everything. She just needed to say yes. Margaret's sister encouraged her. "You deserve this." So Margaret sent him her passport information, her birth date, everything he asked for. When the tickets arrived, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The cruise departed from Miami on a Tuesday. Margaret arrived early, nervous but excited. When she saw David in person, something felt off. He looked older than his photos, thinner. His smile didn't reach his eyes, but she told herself people always look different in person. For 2 days, everything felt like a dream. Breakfast on deck, sunset champagne. He told stories about his late wife, asked about Michael. It felt real, but small things didn't add up. David knew crew members by name, spoke to them in low voices. When Margaret asked, he waved it off. "I've been on this ship before." On day 3, they docked in Cozumel. David suggested they skip the excursion, stay on board. Later, Margaret saw him near the crew quarters talking to a maintenance worker. The conversation looked tense. When he returned, he said he'd been asking about the air conditioning. It didn't feel like the truth. That night, Margaret called her sister. "Something feels strange." Her sister told her to trust her instincts, but also to give it time. Margaret wanted to believe the unease was just fear of happiness, so she ignored it. On the 4th night, David seemed distracted, checked his phone constantly. After dinner, he said he needed to handle business paperwork. He'd be back in an hour. Margaret went to the cabin alone. At midnight, David still wasn't back. At 1 in the morning, someone knocked. A crew member she'd never seen. He said there was a water leak next door. They needed to move her temporarily. Margaret hesitated, but he wore a uniform, seemed professional, so she followed him. They didn't go to another cabin. They went down a stairwell into the belly of the ship where the air smelled like diesel. When Margaret realized what was happening, it was too late. Hands grabbed her. She tried to scream. Then everything went black. Margaret woke on a cold metal floor. Her head throbbed. Her wrists were bound with zip ties. The room was small and dark. A single bulb hung from a pipe. Water dripped nearby. She could hear the ship's engines humming below her. Panic set in, but Margaret forced herself to breathe. She was a nurse. She knew how to stay calm. Footsteps echoed outside. The door opened. A man stepped in. Hard eyes, accented English. "You stay quiet. You cooperate. You don't get hurt." Margaret's voice cracked. "Where's David?" The man smiled coldly. "David did his job. Now we do ours." He left. The door locked. Margaret understood. David wasn't coming. David was never real. He was bait. A lie designed to get her exactly where she was now. Alone. Trapped. In a place where no one would think to look. Hours passed. Maybe days. She tried to keep track by counting footsteps, listening to engine sounds, distant announcements over the intercom. They were still at sea. No one had noticed she was missing, or they assumed she'd disembarked early. David would have made sure of that. A different man brought water and crackers. She asked where they were taking her. He didn't answer. Margaret forced herself to eat, to stay strong. She wasn't going to die here. She started searching the room. Near the corner, there was a loose bolt, rusted and old. She worked it free with her fingers. It took hours. Her nails broke. Her fingers bled. But eventually it came loose. Sharp, heavy. It wasn't much, but it was something. Margaret overheard voices outside, arguments, plans. They were waiting for the ship to dock. She had to act before then. Using the bolt, she worked on the zip ties. It was slow and painful, but eventually they gave. Her hands were free. She waited, listening. The engines changed pitch. They were approaching port. The door unlocked. The younger man who'd brought food entered. Alone. Margaret didn't think. She swung the bolt hard, caught him across the temple. He stumbled. She hit him again. He went down. She grabbed his keycard and ran. The corridors were a maze, narrow and dimly lit. She heard shouting behind them. They'd found him. She climbed a stairwell. Her legs burned, but she kept moving, up toward the light, toward people. She burst through a door into a service hallway. Crew members stared. She must have looked insane, bleeding, barefoot, wild-eyed. "Help me, please. They're after me." Security was called. The ship went into lockdown. Margaret was taken to medical, treated for dehydration and shock. She told them everything. About David, the room, the men. Crew searched the lower decks, found the room, found evidence of others, clothes, passports, documents. But the men were gone, vanished into port crowds. Interpol was notified. The FBI. Margaret gave statements, descriptions, everything she remembered. But David Kent was a ghost. Stolen photos, untraceable numbers, emails routed through servers in 3 countries. He'd done this before, and he'd do it again. Margaret flew home 3 days later. Her sister met her at the airport. They just held each other. Margaret's story made headlines. Widow escapes trafficking ring on cruise ship. The news cycle lasted a week, then moved on. But Margaret's life didn't. She couldn't sleep, couldn't be alone. Every knock at the door sent her heart racing. She started therapy, group sessions with other survivors. Women lured the same way. Older, widowed, lonely, easy targets. One woman had been held 2 months. Another was never found. Margaret realized how close she'd come to disappearing forever. The investigation identified the network. It spanned multiple countries, used cruise ships and cargo vessels. 4 other women were rescued because Margaret fought back, because she survived. But the men were never caught. David Kent vanished, his profile deleted, his trail cold. Margaret knows he's still out there, still hunting. 6 months later, Margaret did an interview, not for attention, but to warn others. "I thought I was being careful, but they're professionals. They know exactly what to say, how to make you feel safe, and by the time you realize the truth, it's too late." She looked at the camera. "If someone online seems too perfect, too eager to meet far from home, please be careful. Please tell someone, because I almost didn't come back, and I was one of the lucky ones. Today, Margaret still lives in that house outside Atlanta. She installed cameras, changed the locks, joined a support group. She doesn't date online, doesn't trust strangers like before. She works with advocacy groups now, speaks at events, warns women about trafficker tactics, the red flags, the manipulation. Every time she tells her story, she sees recognition in their eyes, the fear, the realization it could have been them, because this doesn't just happen to other people, it happens to nurses, teachers, mothers, women who thought they were too smart to be victims. But predators don't see age, they see vulnerability. So I want to ask you something. What would you have done in Margaret's situation? Would you have seen the red flags? Would you have trusted your instincts? Let us know in the comments. And if this story affected you, hit that like button. Share this video. Because right now, somewhere, another woman is receiving a message from a man who seems perfect, and she has no idea the person on the other end isn't who they claim to be. If this video saves even one person, it's worth it. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.